It has been a long time since I've filmed a video, probably close to 2 years, at least. More than 2 years even. So please be kind. Hello, my name is Alexandra and welcome to my channel. Today we will be discussing The Pisces by Melissa Broder. I actually had the opportunity to hear Melissa Broder read from The Pisces at an event at Deep Vellum Books in Dallas, which is an awesome bookstore if you're ever in this part of Texas. I wrote extensively about that experience and will be referencing part of that as part of my review of this book. So if you'd like to read that very long blog post, I will leave it down in the description for you. I'm going to open this discussion with a few of my thoughts that do not spoil the plot, but overwhelmingly, this is going to be a spoilery discussion of the book. So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it, especially if you already enjoy Broder's writing style on her So Sad Today Twitter, or in the accompanying essay collection, or even in her poetry. I think you're going to jive with this. This is not necessarily unexpected or deviating too much from that voice. As far as my non-spoilery thoughts go, I think this is a very, very solid debut. You can tell that Broder is a veteran writer, has had a lot of experience with finding ways to really hone the way that she expresses herself, the way that she tells a story. There's a very unique voice to this book, which I think is something that first-time authors sometimes struggle with, finding something that uniquely speaks to not only their experiences, but the experiences of their characters, which is such a strength in this book. I also just appreciate the way that Broder turns this typical myth on its head, right? So for those of you that don't know what the book is about, I guess I should have started there. The novel's protagonist is a woman in her late 30s named Lucy, who's living in Phoenix, Arizona, and working on her dissertation about the poetic works of Sappho, and she has a really bad breakup with her long-term boyfriend. Following this emotional event, Lucy's sister says, "Hey, come house sit, come take care of my dog while my husband and I travel through Europe and clear your head, work on your dissertation, move on with your life." Her sister also recommends that she go to a group therapy session for sex and love addicts, which has different measures of success. The novel mostly centers on this time that she spends in Venice Beach, where she's dating and experimenting with sleeping with strangers, and eventually on the swimmer that Lucy meets down by the rocks near her sister's home. I really don't want to tell you more of the plot if you don't know it already. There's not a whole lot more to tell, to be perfectly honest, but there are some key details that I think I appreciated being surprised by. Overall, I think the novel has a strong voice, incredible, at times lyrical, at times very sparse writing. I think there's a great balance there between those two modes. And I think it's paced well. I was kind of concerned about that at certain points, but it really never dragged for me. And it also never felt like we were moving too quickly with Lucy. I overwhelmingly recommend it. If I had to give it a star rating, I'd probably give it 5 stars, which I don't do very often. If you have read The Pisces, please stick around. I'm going to discuss my very specific spoilery thoughts. If you haven't, I hope you come back after you have read The Pisces so that we can discuss it in the comments. I will say, for the most part, I don't think you can be spoiled by much for this book. Like most literary fiction, I don't feel like it's about necessarily the plot and revealing specific details. I don't think that necessarily hurts your reading experience because so much of it is about pulling you into that atmosphere, pulling you into a character's mindset, and just totally transporting you somewhere else that not a lot necessarily happens. And not a lot necessarily happens in this book. I think you can make a pretty good argument that only really 4 or 5 things actually happen. But I also understand the want to know nothing about a particular book before you read it. So if you haven't read it, goodbye for real. We're going to talk about spoilers now and come back once you've read the book. Okay, if you are still here, you have read the book, or you don't care about finding out these little details that I think are really significant. So the first thing I want to talk about with this book is the love interest, which let's just get out there, is a merman. And I feel that Broder really deftly navigates our expectations of the mythic and the way that she weaves in the way that we view love, especially in American culture, as this almost like otherworldly or magical experience. Lucy really struggles with wanting something she can't have. That seems to be the chronic problem in her relationships. She only wants to pursue those who don't seem to want to reciprocate that affection or that want. The second someone gets interested in her or is emotionally available to her or even emotionally demanding of her, she shuts down on some level, whether that's by ignoring them or dismissing them, or in some cases being downright cruel to them, such as Dominic, for example. And Lucy is aware of this by the end of the novel. She recognizes that she had this opportunity for pure love with Dominic, that he was so ready to love her and to always forgive her and to always want that affection and that love from her. And yet she just shoves him in a closet and tries to keep him quiet because she's disturbing this time that she has with her mer boyfriend. And this extends to her friendships as well. So you have Claire, who's in a very similar emotional place as far as dealing with her sex and love addiction, in that they're both incredibly in denial about it and feeding each other's denial. But the second that Claire needs something from Lucy in the form of emotional support, especially once she has her own stuff going on with Theo and then with her boyfriend back in Phoenix, whose name I can't remember for some reason. Jamie? Is that right? Jamie? It's as if Lucy feels like she only has a limited amount of emotional resources. And so if someone is asking it of her, she can't give it to them because clearly they need more than she can offer. She has to keep that reservoir very full for herself and for the ones who don't want it. I also think central to the novel is this idea that in American culture, certainly, but Western culture as well, that you need a romantic partner in your life to be happy. And that if you reach a certain age and you don't have that fulfillment, that there must be something wrong with you, or it must become your obsession in life to find that person, to find the one, or at least the one who will commit to you. Lucy's reaction to this perceived expectation is, to me, pretty extreme in that if she gets any hint of acceptance from anyone, whether that's from Claire, from her sister, from her friends back in Phoenix, from the men that she ends up meeting throughout the course of the novel, she runs headlong towards them and throws herself at them, even if she's trying to play coy or sarcastic or disaffected in some way. It never comes across that way because from her core, it's not that. That affect is just that. It's an affect. It's a performance. It has nothing to do with her actual wants and needs and how she intends to fulfill them. So something that really struck me about this book that I wasn't expecting, which I don't know why I wasn't, because it's literally written on the back cover, was the amount of gratuitous sex scenes. And I'm not just talking with the merman, who that's actually, the encounters between her and Theo seem far less sexualized than, for instance, the encounter she has with the guy in the hotel bathroom. And not just because of anal, which that's its own thing we can talk about. I think these descriptions are intentional, that the relationship with Theo is supposed to be leading towards love, right? And supposed to be leading towards this, well, somehow they've got to make it work because clearly they're incredibly compatible, even though, let's be real, they don't know very much about each other at all. We have to keep in mind, this is all from Lucy's first-person perspective, and she makes it pretty clear early on, she's not the most reliable of narrators, which is one of my favorite things, especially unlikable, unreliable female narrators. We're seeing all of this through that very focused, myopic lens. So of course her encounter where she's feeling degraded by the man in the hotel bathroom is going to come across as a degrading experience because for her it is a degrading experience. Also, the experience with the Uber driver towards the very end of the novel, which is supposed to be, in her mind, this moment when she's sort of taking that sexuality back, right? Where she's rejected Theo, and that's obviously not working out, but she's also rejected the sex and love addicts group therapy session because it's just made her feel even worse about herself. And so this is the moment when she's taking control, even if in that moment she's out of control, because when she asks him to have sex, she doesn't even realize she's going to do it until it comes out of her mouth, and then she kind of has to follow through with it, she feels like. She doesn't actually have to follow through with it, but she does. And it's a terrible experience. It's not as degrading as the hotel experience, because in that moment she perceives that she's in more control than she is. But it's also not a pleasant experience. And it's one of the more real experiences that I've read in a sex scene that actually confronts the awkwardness and the uncomfortableness and the vulnerability that it takes to do something like that, especially with a total stranger. That raw quality to the voice, even when you can feel it layered in affect from Lucy's perspective, I really appreciated it. It felt very fresh and new and like something I hadn't read before. So compare those two examples of very degrading sex and very awkward, vulnerable, seemingly in control but not sex, to the sex scenes that she has with Theo. The gratuitousness seems to be glossed over in these scenes, whereas you get very graphic detail in the hotel or in her prep before she goes to the hotel. We don't have to discuss that. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. None of that is nearly as present and is even directly addressed in these sex scenes with Theo. So when she's having anal in the hotel, it's this uncomfortable experience. She's had this prep work, all that sort of stuff for it. And then when she's having anal with Theo, she says very specifically, this is different than how it was before, in part because of these reasons. And she lists out some very specific details about their encounter. But then it's just kind of wrapped in this romantic feeling, right? Which is this idea that when you are in love with someone or perceive yourself to be in love with someone, the sex is different than when it's just with a stranger or it's just with the guy that you hooked up with on Tinder. My feeling is that these are very deliberate decisions on Broder's part to show you that connection she feels with Theo, but also how Lucy will soften the edges of these experiences if it's with someone she feels like she has a long-term possibility with. She gets a little rose-colored glasses with Theo, which is why she doesn't see what he's actually asking her to do at the very end until that very last moment when she has the opportunity to back out. This seems like a moment when Lucy's kind of finally getting some lucidity and finally coming to terms with what it means to be an autonomous person in a relationship and taking some of that control back that she's let these relationships have over her throughout the course of the novel and in every moment preceding it. But it's really not her taking control back. It's a step in the right direction. It's a step in her acknowledging, hey, maybe this isn't so healthy, this act of me killing myself to satisfy some merman. But the thing that really sets that decision into motion is her realizing that other women have already done it. It's not because she herself has value and deserves to not have to do that. It's because she's jealous that she's not as special as she thought she was. Or at least that's the excuse that she gives. Again, this is all through Lucy's first-person perspective, so she could be saying that to kind of justify her decision on some superficial performance level, but actually she feels like she has worth. I'm actually going to read you part of this scene because I think that it perfectly illustrates what I'm trying to say. In my own desire to feel chosen by this beautiful creature, I never thought to ask if others had gone before. It had seemed impossible that his need to be wanted by others was more ravenous than mine. So he had a harem, of that I was sure. Maybe it was just their bones that were left, or whatever didn't decay in the salt water. I was not a scientist. But whether they were alive or dead, sand or flesh, I needed to maintain my singularity. What was I going to do now? Suddenly, I thought of what Chicken Horse had said. Whatever it is you're doing, you don't have to do it. But I did have to do it. What else would I do? So even in this moment, after she finds out about how many other women have come before her and have drowned themselves for this merman, she remembers what someone else from the sex and love addiction therapy told her, not her own assuredness that she could make a different decision. She even thinks of that and then says, but I do have to do it because I don't really have anything else going for me right now. There's such a sadness to that Lucy doesn't even see. She acknowledges this nothingness, right? She calls it the nothingness, which is really just her way of saying her depression or her sadness, if we want to be more general. And even in those moments, that doesn't acknowledge the deep and profound sadness that she's experiencing here at the end. She's been driven to this point where she feels like she has nothing else going for her, and so she's just gonna kill herself, all just because she's in love with this mythical creature that she can't actually be with. But it's enough on some level if she was the only one, if he chose her, if he said, our love is what makes this special. It's only by removing that specialness that Theo honestly gives her an out that she takes whether or not she's happy about it. So I want to shift into talking about the language used in this book, and not just the vulgarity of it, but the actual linguistic decisions that Broder makes. Broder's background is being a poet. She has a sense of economy of words as well as a sense of lyricism. And that really comes through in a way that I didn't expect, especially after the first 20 or 30 pages. There are these dense passages of philosophical exploration that Lucy goes through following some of her most visceral experiences. And I love the way that Broder navigates those two things, the way that she differentiates between those two experiences, not only in her choice of words, but also in her sentence structure and her paragraph structure. I think that she is a very nuanced writer and found a way to give Lucy a realistically philosophical voice, a realistically pondering voice as someone who's pursuing a PhD. She's clearly very educated. She makes a lot of very intellectual, well-studied references throughout the novel. And yet she's also someone that drops the word cock every 2 or 3 pages. So she found a way to create a character whose voice is believably both of those things at once, when normally we think of those two things being mutually exclusive and having to exist either as one or the other. And I feel like Lucy is one of the more complex characters I've read from in the last several years. And I just really appreciated the way that Broder used language to distinguish the multiple facets of Lucy's personality and her intellect and her vulnerability. On another level, I want to talk about the vulgarity of the language. It was a little jarring for me, but not because I'm prudish or because I find those words inappropriate or vulgar or whatever. It's because the vast majority of what I read, which is literary fiction, true crime nonfiction, some young adult, and a lot of poetry, I don't hear a lot of that language used in those other genres. I think Broder made these choices very intentionally, not just because it fits in with the style of the other writing she does outside of the Pisces. So I believe this book was based in part upon Broder's reading of, I want to say it's called The Professor and the Siren. I'll link it below because I'm not positive that's the title. But at the talk that I went to, she talked about how so many times these stories involving a mer creature, so a mermaid, merman, whatever, it's an older man that's having this sexual, lustful, and sometimes romantic relationship with them. And so having it be a woman in her late 30s in Venice Beach is already in and of itself a challenge to that genre, if you want to call it that, to that typical mode of telling this story. But I also think she used language to challenge the expectations of young women living in contemporary United States and the ways that we express our sexuality, the ways that we express those wants and those desires as being equally vulgar to that of men. We have this expectation that men say these sorts of things, which is also a bad assumption to make. Nonetheless, that assumption and plenty of media to back up that assumption is there. And I think that she's challenging this idea that women's sexuality is somehow more delicate or somehow less vulgar or less graphic or less gratuitous, when really sex is sex and personality is personality. And you have some women who express their sexuality in the way that Lucy does, and you have some that express it in the complete opposite. I'm not sure the book passes the Bechdel test, which I don't think it necessarily has to do in order to be seen as like a feminist text. I think that it probably doesn't because of Lucy's obsession with relationships, which is what is being indicted through the plot. It's not uncriticized or unexamined. It's literally central to the plot to challenge this idea that you can fill some void within yourself with obsession, with romance or love or sex or whatever it is, with the mythic, that sort of obsession is in its own way a kind of myth and is not going to fulfill you. So I have rambled on for a good long while and still have not talked about all the things I wanted to discuss. So please let me know what you think in the comments. I'd love to continue discussing this book. I think It's probably going to be up there in my top 5 by the end of the year, which is nuts because I read this so early in the year. Thank you so much for watching, for joining me on my new-ish channel. It's been a really long time since I've made a video, particularly a booktube video, and I'm excited to get back in the groove of doing that again. I will leave my social links and my blog down in the description below, and I hope to talk to you guys soon. Have a good one. Bye. I'm awkward as hell. Holy crap, I've been rambling for about an hour.